Hi, everybody. The author I have chosen to present on is Patrick Cheng. For those of you who don't know Patrick or of his writings, he is a queer theologian. I had the privilege of taking a course, Queer Theology, with him as the professor in 2016. He has authored 3 books, From Sin to Amazing Grace, Discovering the Queer Christ, Rainbow Theology, and an Introduction to Queer Theology, Radical Love. In his book, From Sin to Amazing Grace, Discovering the Queer Christ, Cheng begins by talking about sin with reference to being gay. And it is by grace that queer folks come to accept ourselves as truly created by God. Well, what does this have to do with Jesus? Cheng states that it is by modeling our lives after the queer Christ that gets us from the fear and the guilt mode. In other words, we move from the traditional crime-based model of sin to a queer-based model. Cheng states that the doctrine of theosis also acknowledges that Jesus Christ is grace itself, that Jesus Christ is the greatest unmerited gift of all from God. In the second half of his book, Cheng explains the 7 models of what he refers to as the queer Christ. The erotic Christ, how we are in relationship to each other, the out Christ, we are only our true selves when we are being our genuine self, the liberator Christ, to be actively against oppression, the transgressive Christ, to be radical, almost deviant, the self-loving Christ, not to be ashamed of who we are. The interconnected Christ, don't isolate, be connected to the world. And the hybrid Christ, that Christ is not one-dimensional. Christ blurs the lines, Christ blurs the boundaries. I won't take time to go into each one of these, but to suffice it to say that his point is, instead of living one's queer life as sinful, as bad, it is through Christ that we find our way to God's grace and all that is positive. And we can accomplish this through the queer Christ. In Cheng's book, Rainbow Theology, he focuses on queer theology in reference specifically to people of color. In this, he talks about how race, sexuality, and spirit are fluid and need to be looked at as a group, but not individually. And the rainbow is the perfect metaphor he uses, as the rainbows are fluid symbols that have racial, sexual, and spiritual significance. But the rainbow also reflects the experience of themes, as Cheng describes multiplicity, middle spaces, mediation. Specifically, when talking about the middle space, Cheng says that queer people of color live in that middle space, that they are almost homeless when it comes to the intersection of race, sexuality, and spirituality. He points out that homelessness is central to Christianity, and also says that Jesus was both fully human and fully divine, also exists in the middle space, much like queer people of color. And by looking at it through this lens, Jesus again dissolves the binary divide between divinity and humanity. He also goes on to point out that it is the middle spaces and the disillusion of binaries that is at the heart of queer theology, which he writes about in more detail in his book, Radical Love. In Radical Love, he asks the question, who is Jesus Christ to the LGBTQ community of today? He points out that the idea of Christological doctrines such as the virgin birth, miracles, the resurrection, and the ascension can be difficult for many to understand or believe in. But Cheng argues that these events make perfect sense if they are understood as having dissolved the boundaries between the divine and human because of this person we call Jesus Christ. He says the incarnation and the miracles can be understood as the crossing of the divine to the human realm, and the resurrection and the ascension can be understood as the crossing of the human back into the divine realm. Cheng believes that Jesus is the axis around which all salvation history turns, and that God and humanity are no longer mutually exclusive categories, but come together in the person Jesus Christ, God human. And for him, this is the true significance of the Christological arguments of the early church. Cheng says that God's love is radical, and that we as humans lost that love, and it is through Jesus that we regain the radical love. So often, most of humanity, but especially the queer population, try to overcome the idea that we are evil, that we are less than because the Bible says so. But Cheng's idea of a queer Christ, the idea that because of Jesus, all the lines get blurred. And if we look at Jesus as how we are able to claim or reclaim that radical love of God, we can begin to have a positive image of ourselves and come to accept ourselves as truly created by God, that child of God. I would be interested in how you react to hearing the word queer Christ and what ideas or what feelings that may have stirred in you. For Patrick Cheng, a queer Christ means transforming from some of the traditional ideas that we are inherently bad to we are inherently good, and not being those things, not being good, is what is sinful. What do you think?